Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechtas Chulin daf Lamed Hey. We're going to begin at the very top of Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. So we've been learning some of the dinim of Tumen Tahara, and we were discussing when it comes to Chulin Shenasu al Taras HaKodesh, namely when it comes to Chulin, but a person treats it on a very high level, like it's Kodesh. So what level does it now become? Because normally Chulin can only become a sheni, it cannot become a shlishi. So we had an opinion, in how we understood our Mishnah, that Chulin Shenasu al Taras Kodesh could have the status of going to a shlishi level. And we actually have different opinions, that it could be Chulin Shenasu al Taras Kodesh is only on a truma level, which can only get to a shlishi, and possibly can go to a real level, and we're also going to see maybe it's just like Chulin. So the basic three shitas. So in this, the Gemara continues, Omer Rav Yonasan, Amar Rabbi, Ha'echel shlishi shel truma atzma. A person who eats a shlishi of truma itself. Now we know truma itself, the furthest it can go is to a shlishi level, which means it becomes impure, but it's called puzzle. It doesn't have the capacity to make something else tameh. That's only thing that could is if it was kodesh, because kodesh can make go into a revi level, but truma itself stops at that level. So again, since he takes upon the level of shlishi like the food itself, so therefore he says like this: Ha'echel shlishi truma atzma asul echel umutu liga, which is basically what we said before, that he's not allowed to eat the truma, but he's allowed to touch it. It's kind of similar to the shita we saw of Ula. He doesn't transmit the tuma to truma by contact, but he's considered a shlishi in that he may not eat the truma. So that's what it's saying. Umutaliga, but you can touch it because the shlishi doesn't have the capacity to make you tameh, but nonetheless you still can't eat it. We still consider you like a shlishi. So you're therefore on the same level as the food itself. So the istrach to ula, the istrach to Rav Yonasan. It sounds very similar to what we just said with ula. So why do you need both these statements? Dimid the ula. Again, what did ula say? In yesterday's daf, ula said that if you have a person who eats shlishi shel chulin, shenasu al taras truma, which means you're eating it like it's on the highest level of truma. So nisel gufo lo echel b'truma. So you yourself cannot eat truma, and the reason is because you become a shlishi, which sounds a lot like what you said before, that the truma itself is you can touch it, but you cannot eat it. So truma. Maybe the only time we say this is when it's come to chulin on the truma level. Truma b'negia Nami Usr. Therefore, maybe when it comes to truma, you can't even touch it. So therefore, it's to Rabbi Yonasan. That's why Rabbi Yonasan says liga, you can touch it, so it's not a problem. However, if you Rabbi Yonasan, if you only had that statement, havamina hanimili truma of a chulin be'achil and nami shari tzricha. You would think, since he says that you're allowed to touch it, so you would maybe think chulin b'achil nami shari, that you could also eat the chulin. Now again, he says clearly, asr le'echol was asr to eat truma. You're not allowed to eat truma, but the chulin itself, maybe you are allowed to eat. Tzricha, to tell you that not only can you not eat truma because you're considered to be like a shlishi like itself, but the chulin shenasu al taras kodesh, chulin shenasu al taras truma, also takes upon itself the same level, and therefore it's considered to be impure, and therefore you can't eat that. Fine. So again, basically, one is to tell you that you can't touch. You're allowed to touch it. That's going to happen, but you're not allowed to eat it. Yosef Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marsa Kamed Rav Nachman. Yosef V'Kaimer, he was saying the following: So here, you are eating a shlishi of chulin that is on the level of Taras HaKodesh. In other words, Shlishi could become a Revi if it's with regard to Kodesh. But how about when it comes to Chulin Shenasu al Taras HaKodesh? So he says, Tahar le'echel b'Kodesh. You actually are allowed to eat it. She'ein locha davar ha'isur Revi b'Kodesh el Kodesh mekudesh bilvad. So the Chulin Shenasu al Taras HaKodesh cannot, at least according to Zman Omer, get to a Revi l'Tuma. The only time is Kodesh itself, says Rashi. Elin kein hayashlishi shel Kodesh mekudesh. If it's a mamish, it's not Chulin shenasu al Taras Kodesh, but we're talking because it's still Chulin, right? So even though it's true, you take upon yourself this higher level, but it's still Chulin. However, when we're talking about this case of Kodesh itself, that of course can become a Revi, but only that, says Rashi. Shlishi of the Revi b'Kodesh. Malahi de Rabbanan. This is actually a Malah, as the Gemara Chagiga says in Daf Chav. Behem Mailas Achronos Damrin and Hassam. So the third parak of Chagiga has a very long Mishnah, and it has 5 categories in which could be like Dura de Mamoina, Din Deraisa, one's Din Derabanan. Some say it's 11. Deleisul who Durora the Tuma Midaraisa. So it says not Durora the Mamoina, Dura Tuma Midaraisa. So the question is it some of them are linked to a Tuma Deraisa, some like and then it talks about Chatzitza among other cases over there, and some of them are only the Rabbanan. The Chitiknu Rabbanan Mishlishi the Kodesh Mekudesh who the Tikkun. So we say that when it comes to Kodesh becoming a Revi, that's a Durabanan. So we're talking about. It's actually a Kal V'chomer, right? So over there we went up from Mechusar Kippurim. So someone who is able to eat Truma but just cannot eat Kodesh. So we see that there's a distinction between Truma and Kodesh, because we know, as the first Mishnah in Brachos says, that Kohanim, you can start eating Truma after Seitzah Chachavim. But if you're Mechusar Kippurim, you can't eat Kodesh until the next day after you bring the carbon. So we see that we're more Chomer when it comes to Kodesh than Truma. So if we already know through a pasuk, which Rashi doesn't quote over here, but we already know through a pasuk that Truma goes to a Shlishi level, so then Kal V'chomer, Kodesh should go up to a Revi level. So that is the Kal V'chomer over there. So l'chayra it should work. So Rashi says the truth is, he gufa lav ksiva behedya v'yasmachta b'yalmahu, right? So it's just really in the smachta, this whole din of shlishi to Revi, etc. So therefore, the Kal V'chomer is still, you can't hold it like a din deraisa. Anyway, so since it's not a din derabanan, says it's only din derabanan, kodesh mekudesh, kodesh gomer shekodesh gufa could go in basar carbon. All those things can make things into Revi. Says Rashi, the fact that it's Chulin, right? But it's Chulin Shenasu al Taras Kodesh because you made this oral declaration that you're saying that's going to have the same status of Kodesh. It's not going to still have the capacity to make something into Revi. It's not Kodesh. So your words are not going to have the ability to do it. Revi will pasal gavra, and since it can't make into Revi, it's not going to pasal the person. If obviously Chulin Shenasu al Taras Kodesh, it cannot affect the person. So too when it comes to Chulin Shenasu al Taras Truma. So let's go back to the bar. So Chulin Shenasu al Taras HaKodesh, when it comes to Chulin Shenasu al Taras HaKodesh, Taru Echel b'Kodesh. So you're allowed to eat it. So we're not concerned. We don't say, oh, the person becomes like it and therefore he becomes tamei. No, this is not the situation. So Masiv Rami Bar Chama Shlishi Sheni l'Kodesh. So he said that if person has a Shlishi, so it's considered like you are a Sheni regarding Kodesh, which therefore obviously then you can make something into a Shlishi and Baiter. Vein Sheni l'Truma. However, you're not considered to be a Sheni with regard to Truma. Then we say like this: B'chulin Shenasu al Taras Truma. Amai. So why do we say that? Holav Kodesh Mekudeshu. Why do we say that it becomes a sheni by chulin. So hanach l'truma shetarta tuma he eitzol kodesh. So this is an important concept, as we're going to see, that when we look at truma, because it's not on the same sanctity as kodesh, we will automatically say that truma is considered to be impure compared to kodesh. We hold kodesh on a much higher level, and therefore truma is considered to be unsanctified in comparison to kodesh. Says Rashi, Shlishi didei misafkinan law b'sheni l'gabi kodesh v'shemachi pasal l'gavra. Okay. So menat temra, how do we know that this is true, that we don't view truma? Obviously, a person that's going to be careful when they eat truma. So why would we ever say that the level of seriousness and focus when it comes to truma is any different than kodesh? So we see this in Masechtas Chagiga. Ditnan, there's a mission over there. It says Umanat Tamer. So Ditnan, big the Ama Aretz. When it comes to the garments of an Ama Aretz, he's wearing a shirt or whatever it is. But because he's not very particular in the dinim of Tum and Tahara, it's medris lepirushim. When it comes to someone who's a perushin, someone, says Rashi, oichli chulin b'tara. He always eats his chulin with purity, which technically you don't have to, but they're particular. So therefore, it becomes a medris. One who lies down on that kli, he becomes tameh. Even though the garment itself, we don't know that, no one's saying it was tameh, but because it's watching of this garment is not on a very high level because it belongs to an Amma Aretz, so Perushim who are in contact with it and lie down on this Kli, it will transmit Tumah to the Perushim. And for that matter, Big Day Perushim Medusal Eichli Truma. And Big Day Eichli Truma Medusal Kaidish. Now that is the key line over here. So a Zav transmits the Tumah by Medris by lying on these particular things. So we see clearly that even though it's truma, it's not considered to be sanctified in comparison to kodesh. And we had this as question TA3, and I breezed by it yesterday, but I should have been more cognizant to learn it as it says it here. Well, Inyan ma nemer, when do we say that the shetaharta truma is actually tuma eitzel kodesh? That pure truma is still considered to be tameh in comparison to kodesh. So one is, as we just said, that when it comes to big di oichli truma, someone who has clothes of someone who is fit to be able to eat truma, and someone who is in kodesh comes in contact with that garment, it becomes medrus. And so to a person, and furthermore, as we said before, truma, if a person who takes the chulin food to the truma level, the nasaguf is sheni l'kodesh. We say that you are like a sheni, and therefore you can transmit tuma to truma. Okay, so Omar Rava midrasos ka'amrit. So what do you want to do? You're trying to prove to me that truma tahara is considered tameh compared to kodesh because of medris, because of tumas medris. Again, a zav transmitting the tumah by medris. So shani midrasos. We cannot use this as an example to prove this. Why? Because Shem, as we continue with Beis, when it comes to medris, we have a situation which could very commonly take place. A woman who's in need is sitting on it. It says Rashi Shema Yashva, maybe she'll sit on it. Truma Mizdahariba Shopper, even though it's true, as far as the eating of truma, she's careful because she's in need. She's not going to eat truma. Mihu gabi kodesh lahavi shmira. We don't say that it's the same level of shmira when it comes to kodesh. V'chayshin and hoyel v'tuma matsuyahi. This is something which is common. It's obviously becoming a nida is something which is happens every month. So therefore, it's something that we should be concerned about when it comes to medris. Avol beperi lo amrinan. What does that mean? It says Rashi, the ain tumasim matsuyahavi shmiras truma shmir l'kodesh. So you don't have to be as careful about sitting on fruit or something like that. But a woman can be sitting on a kli who's tamei. That's something more practical. So therefore, by tumas medrus, we can have this stringency. But why, in general, do we have it in other cases? Rabbi Yitzchak b'peri nami omar. No, he actually does say it also there. So most of Rabbi Yirmiyah medifti miyamin b'peri. Do we taka say that also this din applies when it comes to fruits? But to not im omar. If a person says hifrashti l'toich revius kodesh, this is all chagiga. If a person says that I've separated a revius of kodesh, so we believe him. Okay, so let's slow down. Let's look at Rashi. So Rashi quotes further the Gemara in Chagiga. Yehuda, in the location of Yehuda, nemanim ami aretz al taris yain l'nesachim. So when it comes to the wine, for us to be able to use it in the Beis HaMikdash, obviously we can't have any tumah problems. And we trust those people, even though they're Am Haratzim, that it's fine. Im Amru Taharin Hain, if they say Taka the wine is good, then him Nuhu Rabbanan, we will trust them. Why? They're Am Haratzim. Why do you trust them? So the Gemara there says, quoting Rashi, so it's a practical reason, even though really they're Am Haratzim. But if we start not trusting people, then people are like, so I'm not going to go to the Beis HaMikdash. They're going to become discouraged and not end up serving in the Beis HaMikdash, going to the Beis HaMikdash. They'll end up doing their own service. We're going to cause people to sin and fall. So even though it's true they're Amaratzim, we're going to accept their wine. Now that's by Kodesh. Ala Truma Einemanim. Interestingly enough, we're more lenient when it comes to Kodesh. But now when it comes to Truma, only during certain times when they're extra careful to make sure everything is tahar. For example, during the time of wine and olive press season. If that time has passed, and he brings us a barrel of truma. Now, normally we don't trust him anymore. We're not going to accept it from him. We will accept when it comes to wine, which is for kodesh purposes, but not for truma. V'im amrlo. So, and you could say because maybe you're more strict when a person will be more strict to be more careful to be tahar when it comes to kodesh, not by truma. It's not a big deal. Who cares? It's only truma. Maybe he thinks. V'im amrlo. If he says to us, if rashnu teichavias zeh revius l'nesachim, that I did take a revius, a measurement of nesachim, which is kodesh, neman al kulam, mekalim and koin v'shaisa. So, interestingly enough, even though we only trust him regarding kodesh, we don't trust him regarding truma. However, the Gemara over there tells us that once he already says that I separated revius kodesh, we're going to trust him, because once it already has truma and kodesh, since it's like a migu, he's trusted with a kodesh, so we're also going to trust him with a truma too. We're not going to say that the truma made the kodesh tamei. If it's true that it's considered to be like tamei in comparison to kodesh, to tamet truma kodesh. So if they're together, then achayra we should say that the truma could make the kodesh tamei. So Amalei says no, you can't learn that as a kasha to our case, because toma dichiborin ka'amrit. This is a situation where the truma and the kodesh are chiborin, they're attached, they're in the exact same kli. So toma de bichibor mishani, the migu de mihim and a kodesh mihim nami a truma. So since it's also migu, since once we know we always trust him on kodesh, we always do. Truma we don't, except unless it's during the time of the pressing. But once it's together in the same place, so then we're going to trust. However, if it's not bichiburin, so therefore truma is considered to be tamei in comparison to kodesh. Masar Rav Huna bar Nosan, hasheni shebechulin. When it comes a sheni with regard to chulin is matama mashke, is matama mashke chulin upaisel oichle truma. So let's go slow. So if you have a sheni, so we say, and it's mashka, So mashkin makes things into a rishon, and therefore it could make it to a sheni, and that in turn it will passel to a shlishi level for truma. But a shlishi, if we're dealing with a shlishi, not starting off with a shlishi, but starts lower, so matama mashke kodesh upoisel eichli kodesh b'chulin shenasu ataras kodesh. So we see that it goes down a level, but we see another important detail. We see clearly that it becomes a revi b'kodesh. Marin says you're right, but tanoihi the sign yechulin shenasu ataras kodesh harin kachulin. So some say that it only has a chulin level. Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Tzadok Omer Arihin Katruma, with Tami Shnayim V'Lissel Echad. So it can make, it can be Tami 2, in other words, it can make a Shlishi and also to Revi, and it can also Pasal Echad 1. In other words, it can only go to a Shlishi, but not to a Revi level. Okay, so we see clearly over here, which was question TB TB6 rather. Mahadin shel shlishi b'chulin shenasu ataras kodesh inin tuma. So we see clearly it's kachulin, kekodesh, and we already said it's ketruma. Okay. So with that said, let's move on to a new piece. Okay. Rav Shimon Omer hokshru b'shchita. So again, we saw in the Mishnah 2 days ago that when it comes to a situation where you have on Lamed Gimel, a person who shechs a behema, for example, and no blood comes out. So we say that even though you didn't wash your hands, so it's not machshir kabel tuma, so therefore you could, it's fine. Rav Shimon says it's still considered to be a machshir b'shchita. In other words, you have to still wash your hands because you could be your hands, which are sheni l'tuma. So that's what he said. Well, how could it be chulin? It'll become a shlishi, but a shlishi can't become a chul. Could not be chulin, can't become a shlishi. That was the whole why we went into all these dinim l'tuma tahara. But he says no, it doesn't matter. Even if there's no liquid, normally you need the liquids of yad shachat dam, the 7 liquids, to be a machshel kabel tuma. He says no, that's not true. When it comes to shchita, all you need to do is the shchita. Apparently, even if there is no dam, it's still a machshir. So let's see the Gemara. Omer Avasi, Omer Hoyer Shimon, shchitasu machsheres. The shchita is machshir, which is mashma v'lo dam. That dam is not machshir, which is kind of hard to understand. Says Rashi, the shchita is machshir, the basar, to potentially become tameh, not dam. So says Rashi, v'naf gemina di'il nafel dam shchita al zeroyim, that if, let's say, the dam of the shchita fell onto some vegetation, l'hukshru to a mikri dam shchita mashke. The dam of the shchita itself is not considered to be a liquid to be machshir. He's saying that it's specifically the shchita, not the dam, because again, obviously you have to do shchita. So what's the difference if it's machshir or it's the dam that's machshir? So the chiddush is that if you do the shchita and the dam falls on something else, so in other words, it does not that the animal, but the blood itself falls onto something. Is that blood machshir? So he says not. That blood is not machshir. It's only the shchita. So le masayle Rav Shimon Omer hokshir b'shchita ma'ila b'shchita v'lo b'dam lo af b'shchita. So maybe it means either, right? This and this. So it's not necessarily a proof. Tashma. Armon Rav Shimon b'chiyat dam machshir. Is it the dam that's a machshir? V'lo shchita machsheres. So we see clearly that it's only the shchita, not the dam. No hakikam rohen. V'chi dam bilvad machshir. Is it only the dam? Av shchita nami machsheres. So again, it's not a raya necessarily that it's only the shchita without and not the dam that's machshir. Tashma. Rav Shimon Omer dam hameis. When it comes to an animal that died on its own, eino machshir. So he said that dam is not considered to be machshir kabel tuma. Okay. My love, ha dam shchita machshir. It's only dam hameis that's not machshir. Mashma, the dam of shchita is lo. Ha dam chalolim machshir. It's saying that when it comes to dam chalolim, animals that were killed is a machshir. Ha dam shchita mai lo machshir. So lashmin and dam shchita. So tell me dam shchita is not. The koshkin dam a mace, and then tell me for sure an animal that died on its own is its dam is not a machshir. No, dam a mace is tzrichale. We needed the chiddush that when it comes to an animal that died on its own, that's not machshir. Why? You would think mali katl ihu mali katl malchamavis. What's the difference? Who killed it, right? So you would think that either way it should be machshir. Kamash malon, that when it comes to dam hames taka, it's not machshir. Okay, fine. So just to step back, so dam chalolim are animals that were killed as is a machshir, but dam shemes, which we just saw, shitas Rav Shimon, animals that died on their own is not a machshir, and it's a machlokas by shchita. So that's the 3 points. Dam chalolim, animals that were killed, is definitely machshir. When it comes to dam shemes, an animal that just died on its own, its blood is not machshir, and the shchita is a machlokas. Tashma Rav Shimon omer dam migafto in a machshir. Dam from a wound is not machshir. So my love, had dam shchita machshir. The dam from a shchita is taka machshir. So lo, had dam chalol machshir. When it comes to the dam of chalol, an animal that was killed, that's machshir. Of dam shchita my lo machshir slash mina dam shchita v'koshkein dam megavato. So mention the case of the animal with the wound. No, dam megavato, it's richale. We needed to teach the chiddush that's also not a machshir. It's tzrichale. Why? It's not going to mean that you think mali katu kula mali katu palga. What if you killed it all the way or halfway, right? So therefore, either way, you should say it's the same. It should have the same din. So therefore, the chiddush is that when it comes to a dam, which comes from an animal wound, so in that situation, that is not machshir. Dam chalolim the machshir. So why taka do we say that an animal that was killed is machshir, the blood? The pasuk says v'dam chalolim yishte. It says clearly the blood of chalolim yishte, which means it's like a liquid, right? So the dam shchita nami kosav al artz tishmechenu kamayim. So the shchita, it mentions that the blood is like water, so therefore it should be machshir. And therefore, this actually is an opinion that we see that taka, based on this pasuk, it shows that the dam shchita is machshir. No, maybe the dam shchita is not a machshir. So why does it say al artz tishmechenu kamayim? Tahu lemishrei daman depsuli hamikdashim. When it comes to a carbon, says Rashi, l'achar sheniftu, and it's already been, there was something wrong with it, right? It became possible, so you redeem it. So ma mayim mutarim bahana, water you can obviously drink. In general, you can have some water from a stream. Avdam psul mikdashim mutarim bahana. So to the blood of this psul mikdashim, after it's been redeemed, you can use this blood. Obviously, you can't eat, never can eat blood, but you can. It's mutar bahana. The high krab of psul mikdashim akmin lo b'sifri, because this pasuk is actually talking about a case of psul mikdashim. So what is the whole chiddush over here as we continue to lamid vavim now? We would think hoyel of the asiri begiz rabbi. We know that even after you redeem it, when it comes to psul mikdashim, it's still usher to shear, and it's also usher to do avoda with it, as Rashi quotes. Tizbach v'lo giza, basa v'lo chol. So that's more, and b'chayres we'll get to soon. So therefore, because we know that there's certain restrictions even after the redemption of psul mikdashim, maybe you think daman liboy kvura. Maybe actually it's also by none. You have to bury it. Kamash malan that you do not have to do that. Actually, when it comes to psul mikdashim, it is okay. Okay, we're going to stop there. Let's look at question 6. Man nilmad. What do we learn out from dam with regard to that dam is like water, because it says that you pour it like water. So one says it means it's a machshir, that dam shchita is a machshir, just like water is one of the liquids. Or it's to tell you that the blood of psul mikdashim after it's been redeemed is mutar b'hana. Question TA 3 we saw. And TA4 is going to be on next month's test, I should say. TB7. Terman Shayched Vihitis Dam al Dalat Hadkan.